Officials from Germany, France, Ukraine and Russia have dropped their plans to hold a four-way meeting on the ceasefire violation in eastern Ukraine on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. Though Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs Pavlo Klimkin met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov and said that they haven't managed to agree on anything. At the same time, Ukraine's president delivered a speech on the Russian threat, and Richard Govan, an expert on the UN, presented at the conference a new report on what a potential UN peacekeeping mission in the Donbas would look like. That's it. And we are joined by Andreas Umland, a German analyst based in Ukraine, who is the research fellow at the Institute of Euro-Atlantic Cooperation, to discuss the issue and the development. So, Andreas, what new we have learned? I can't say there were much expectation, yet there were some from the recent security talks.
Well, I think these sort of conferences, they are usually not the fora for some sort of new idea. Sometimes that happens, like when Putin gave his infamous speech in 2007, I think, or 2007, I think it was. But at this conference, like in most of these conferences, there wasn't anything in substance new. There were some nuances. The main discussion was, as far as I gathered, about the relationship between NATO and the EU, how the EU would further develop, how the EU would develop in terms of defense, and how that would then relate to NATO. And also the Ukrainian problem was also discussed. And here the main topic, as you have already indicated, that is emerging now is whether it will be possible to get a mandate from the UN Security Council for a peacekeeping mission, for a substantive peacekeeping mission, not the proposal that Putin made last year about a small peacekeeping operation to basically protect the OSCE observers, but a real peacekeeping mission of several thousand peacekeepers, soldiers and police force. And we have now a new report on this from Rasmussen International.
Before we'll go to the report and to see the probability, we definitely should say to our audience that it is the case. It's seriously discussed. We know that the diplomats are working in the UN Security Council. The Ukrainian diplomats are working. So, you know, it's not just a wishful thinking. But before that, we would like to hear the quote from the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko.
Today and yesterday here in Munich, I never listening the words conflict on the east of Ukraine. Not anymore. We name it aggression of Russian Federation against sovereign and independent country. At the beginning of year 2015, immediately when we signed the second phase of the Minsk agreement, in Minsk exactly 4 years ago, I said that it is absolutely necessary to have a peacekeeping operation under the mandate of the United Nations Security Council. At that time, nobody believed in that. Everybody said that this is impossible. Why? Simply impossible. And today I'm proud to hear that all our partners, from Australia to Canada, from the United States to the United Kingdom, in some European countries, it started to be the part of the coalition agreement. And I want to thank Germany for that. Question for the peacekeeping operation in Ukraine, which can bring the peace to my country. Because I'm a president of peace. I'm not a president of war. And we don't have an idea to win Russia. We just want that Russia take their troops back from their Ukrainian territory. We wanted that they tank all their tanks, multi-rocket launch system, state-of-the-art production of the Russian military technical complex, who specially produced to kill Ukraine. Our request very simple: stop killing Ukrainians. Take your troops back. Take your tanks back. Take your artillery system back. And we don't have any problem in Ukraine.
You know, Andreas, we're living for already a number of years with this conflict, but with the discussion on the peacekeepers, more or less, yeah, it had become serious around half a year ago. So can we really explain how the President Poroshenko could be perceived by the public of the Security Conference? Because, you know, we can always speak about the Ukrainian fatigue, but there are really people listening to that as all the same, or there is something new people would like to hear from Ukrainian side?
Well, I think most people acknowledge that Ukraine cannot do much here about the conflict situation. In fact, I think most Western observers, when they think about Ukraine, they think rather about the domestic issues that Ukraine has. I would also like to add to this presentation that, to my knowledge, the first comprehensive outline in English language was already published in 2014 by my colleague Andrei Novak in Nuremberg in Germany on the Eastern Europe platform of the Green Party, who for the first time outlined this idea of a UN peacekeeping operation and a temporary international administration for the currently occupied territories. There were also other people who were writing in between this period about this idea. So now we have this indeed as a serious topic since half a year, basically since Putin has brought up the topic of the UN, although his proposal was not accepted. And now people are basically waiting whether something may come out of these discussions. The problem here is, the key problem is that Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It has to give its agreement. And also there is the problem that Russia may, if they decide actually to give a green light to a real peacekeeping mission, that Russia may try to manipulate this peacekeeping mission in a way concerning the mandate, the composition of the peacekeeping force, in a way that would perhaps then not be actually acceptable to Ukraine, which then would Ukraine perhaps put in a very difficult situation if Ukraine then rejects such a proposal from the UN Security Council.
I would like to read some, the summary, the most important, to outline the most important issues from the report which was done by Richard Govan. So it's about that a peacekeeping force will need a robust mandate and include 20,000 personnel. Non-NATO European countries like Sweden, Finland or Austria could play important roles. Also, it's said that the force would work as an enforcing mechanism to the Minsk Accord. Some political conditions alongside ceasefire would have to be fulfilled before its deployment, while others, notably local elections in the occupied regions, can only be delivered after full deployment. As well, there is the civilian component of the force will be critical to deal with law and order issues and potential local tensions. A 2,000, 4,000 strong police and civilian force will be needed to this end, with the EU potentially playing a key role in force generation, and a special representative should be appointed to lead and coordinate the process. So it looks like a reasonable thing, though there are a number of compromises, of course, and also if you look at that, how realistic is this offer? How close to what we can do, and are some kind of tricky compromises?
Well, I think it links actually up to another topic of this conference, which is the sanctions regime. And if the sanctions regime will be upheld, I think at one point Russia may agree to this, because if economic and social issues become salient enough in Russian domestic affairs, then I think we have a chance that actually Russia will try to find a way to get out of the Donbas, to get rid of the sanctions, and not to lose its face in all of this. And as a UN Security Council member, it could be sort of part of this whole thing and could present itself perhaps to the Russian population as a sort of initiator of this whole process. So this is a difficult thing to say, that what the chances are, because it basically depends on what the calculations, and I would say largely domestic calculations of the Kremlin are, in terms of domestic affairs, how important economic issues will be in distinction to propaganda issues.
But at the same time, we should say that, of course, if non-NATO countries could serve, there are a lot of questions, as, you know, of course, the Swedes or maybe Austrians, but at that time it's really hard to to imagine, you know, the Latin American troops or the representatives of Latin American countries come to the region of Donbas. So really, if you look in the details, you really understand how far is that from this stage. But I would like also to give a quote from the German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sigmund Gabriel, who actually mentioned how the proposition on the peacekeepers could be connected to the sanctions.
Most of the representatives of the German economy here in this room know that I have a very clear position on this. My opinion is that we need to manage to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine and to get heavy weaponry out of the region. I found the Russian president's idea of securing the area using a UN Blue Helmets mission to be the right idea, and I am convinced that if we can manage it, we should start reducing sanctions against Russia step by step. I know that the official position on this is a different one. The official position says that only when the Minsk agreement has been implemented to 100% will the sanctions be completely lifted. I don't think that this is a realistic position. Rather, I think that if you want to make progress, then progress has to be felt by both sides. And it cannot be that we are only busy sticking to our demands rather than working on how to move towards the other party.
Andreas, what's new we can expect from Germany at this stage?
Well, this statement by Gabriel has been heavily criticized in Ukraine, but in fact it's not a new position by Germany. There was already last year, if not before, the idea that if there is real substantial and prolonged progress in the Donbas, then there could be a gradual softening of the sanctions, which is, as Minister Gabriel rightly said, actually in contradiction to the original position of the European Council on this from summer 2014, when the sanctions were introduced. And it was said that only after full implementation after full withdrawal, actually there were no Minsk agreements when the sanctions were introduced. That is also a slightly fuzzy issue here. So only when Russia would fully withdraw, then the sanctions would be lifted, all of the Donbas related sanctions. And now the proposal is here to have a gradual approach. Some improvement will be gratified, so to say, with some lifting of sanctions, and maybe that's also. I mean, it's criticized in Ukraine, but maybe it's in the interest of everybody to get gradually to a better situation.
But if to be very brief, what do we really expect from the German foreign policy, especially with still ongoing coalition talks?
Well, the coalition is not yet in place. The coalition talks have been finished. There's a coalition agreement, but the two parties, the main part or the three parties of the coalition, will have to agree. And the big question here is whether the Social Democrats will agree, because they will have, so to say, a referendum in their party on and all party members will be able to vote on this coalition agreement. But I think the chances are now that probably this coalition agreement will be approved by all relevant parties, and that we will have sooner or later a coalition. I would think by the end of March there should be a coalition.
And then probably would expect, I can't say that the German foreign policy isn't coherent, but then you can have more predictable, let's say, and more involved position after the inner issues are.
Yeah, but the problem is not that salient in this case, because the old coalition is already the new coalition. So there might be changes in the personnel, but the parties in the coalition remain the same, and there will not be a large departure from the current position.
And the last quote we would like to present is by Volker, who is the U.S. Special Representative on the Ukrainian negotiation. What's interesting is that he talked to Vladislav Surkov some weeks ago, and we wanted to hear another public statement. He gives a feeling that nothing would happen before the Russian elections, but that's coming pretty soon. So let's hear to Mr. Volker.
Russia says that it cares about the people in eastern Ukraine, says that it wants to protect Russian-speaking people. Says that is why it is supporting efforts there. Well, the best thing that we could do to protect people, to create security, to create peace, would be to have a UN-mandated peacekeeping force there that would effectively end the conflict and then create the space where the Minsk agreements could be fully implemented. Russia has produced a Ukraine that knows its own identity. Russia's produced a Ukraine that is more unified, more nationalist, more Western-oriented than ever before. And Russia is losing the goodwill of a younger generation in Ukraine. So Russia's intervention is producing the opposite of what Russia would actually want. So if we have, on the one hand, getting nothing out of this...
Are you suggesting that's true even in the Donbas?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. No, people don't like being ruled by thugs that they didn't choose anywhere in the world. So if you're not getting anything out of it, and if you're also paying a very high price, which is sanctions from the U.S., sanctions from the European Union, no effective U.S. relationship, no effective EU relationship, the cost of civil administration, the cost of the military conflict, casualties, general reputation for Russia in the world. The only benefit to this is for Putin domestically. Beyond that, it's a huge negative, and it doesn't produce any good.
Andreas, it's more or less the very same quote Volker keep saying for the last half a year. So really, as an analyst following that, what are the things you're following? What would be for you the sign that things are a bit moving? What are we expecting?
Well, I think the Western position is crucial here. The unity of the European Union, the coordination between the European Union and the US, how the whole US-Russia conflict around the intervention of Russia in the US election is playing out. In a very strange sense, I think Ukraine may be a beneficiary of this Russian intervention in the US election, because now many people in the US have become very upset with Russia, and oddly this is to the advantage perhaps of Ukraine.
Okay, so we'll follow. It's a long story. Andrea, thanks a lot.